Sunday morning adult class, and it's a 9:15 World Religions New Thought class, and I am Paul Day, and welcome. It is March 14th, and gosh, it is one of those days that you just feel like it's an hour earlier for some reason. I'm not sure why. And I'm going to be reading today's daily word, and it's a good one for today because we're all going to be needing that, I think, a little bit more today. And that is, it is the word energy. The energy of divine life renews me. How do I have the focus to achieve my goals? How do I have the strength to carry on through challenging times? How do I have the aptitude to learn, grow, and change when I'm called upon to do new things? At the heart of everything I'm called to do is the energy to do it. I am a divine being, and I call upon the power of God within me to channel my energy in deliberate ways. Divine energy is inexhaustible, unlike my muscles, which can tire, and my mind, which can feel frazzled. The power of God within flows through me unimpeded. In prayer, I claim divine energy and imagine it flowing through me with the force of a mighty waterfall. I'm grateful for my renewal. And from the book of Isaiah, even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. And I know today you're going to be feeling that. So today we have Dr. Paula Armknecht. She's one of our board members, and she's going to be giving a talk from Dr. Thom Shepherd, Reverend Dr. Thom Shepherd, and it is Kingdom Come. So with that, I'm going to take you to Paula. Oops.
Hey everyone, I just finished reading the book, Kingdom Come, Understanding the Book of Revelation. It is by Ed Townley, who is an ordained Unity minister for 20-some years now. And at least at the time of the writing of this book, in 2012, he was the host of Unity Online Radio. I do not know if he is still in that position. He quotes in here a number of authors. Some of the more familiar ones probably with us are H. Emily Cady, her Lessons in Truth, and Charles Fillmore, The Revealing Word. He also quotes in here from John Bishop Shelby Spong, all names that we're very, very familiar with. What he does is he looks at the symbolism in Revelation of the Bible, and he focuses on the metaphysical meanings of those symbols. Very eye-opening when you look at what some of the symbolism means to us today. He likens this, which I really love, to The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which follows the storyline of many of the great stories, the Iliad, the Odyssey, more recently, he says The Wizard of Oz, The Hobbit, the Tolkien's work, where the hero in the story returns to the place that he started from, which I think was really fascinating. But he likens the book of Revelation to that. Some of the history of this I thought was really fascinating. One, it's attributed to John as the writer, and Reverend Ed says that we don't really know what John that was, if it was John the disciple. Some scholars say it was John the elder. It was written somewhere in the latter part of the century after Jesus' death, so we don't know about that. But the John that wrote the story was actually exiled on the island of Patmos, and that was because he was a follower of the teachings of Jesus, which wasn't very popular within when the Roman Empire and with a lot of the orthodoxy at the time, because the teachings were very controversial to, what was accepted teaching. And so he was exiled on this island, and he actually wrote this as letters to other followers of the faith that, the teachings of Jesus. They weren't called Christians at the time, but this was actually written to them. And it was written in code, and it was written in symbol, because they understood what it meant. They lived with a very real fear of persecution. And so a lot of the warnings that he wrote to them were, as a result of that, or how to avoid that sort of thing. I thought it really interesting that the Revelation, the book of Revelation, has become what it is now. It's such a, seen as such a book of, God's judgment on people, that people still today, as they did then, they believed Jesus was coming back for them. And now, you still have people that believe in the apocalypse and that they're going to be taken up in a rapture. I just thought that was fascinating, and all that's based on the imagery that he uses in symbol and code in these letters to other followers. There's a lot of symbols that I'm going to talk about through here and the metaphysical meanings of them, but a few of them, just to kind of get those out of the way, that I wanted to share up front, was numbers. There are certain numbers in the book of Revelation that were very well known to the readers of these letters, because they were very well versed in numerology and understood the meanings of them. The number 7, of course, was extremely important throughout the book, or throughout the book of Revelation. And that has been related to so many things over history. Some religious sects see that as, the 7 sacraments. It's been called the cycles of spiritual awakening, the days of creation. Think back to, to Genesis, and the 7 days that in Hinduism, the chakras, the tree of life, etc., etc. But 7 has always been an important number that was used repeatedly throughout those letters. The number 12, a number of completion. We think of, the 12 disciples, that even when they lost one, it was necessary to replace them to keep that number 12 intact. And of course, the powers of the Christ presence. Charles Fillmore taught about the powers of man, and the 12 powers of man: faith, will, understanding, imagination, power, zeal, understanding. Faith, will, understanding, imagination, power, zeal, love, discrimination, strength, elimination, order, and generation. Okay, again, 12, very, very important number. 144 is mentioned throughout the book of Revelation, and that, of course, is just a multiple of 12. It's a very, very powerful number. Also 144,000, again, it's a multiple of that 12. The number 4 is used quite a bit in the writing, and he says that is the essential aspects of the divine, which are dominion and authority, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. It's a hard word to say. And what I found really interesting, 666, and we know what that has come to symbolize, in modern culture, a lot of fear, that puts into people. And he said that that was a code for Nero Caesar to the readers of the letters. And what I find really funny, it's not funny, I guess it wasn't funny to them, but it's kind of funny now. They at the time believed that Caesar was not really dead, that he had actually escaped from the consequences of his actions and was amassing a large army somewhere. And he kind of relates that to the belief that, the more modern day belief that Elvis didn't really die. But that's what they believed at the time. And that was the code for him. Things were written in code because he couldn't criticize the Romans, not safely, couldn't criticize the orthodoxy safely for fear of persecution. And so he used symbolism, and he used words. I found it interesting that Reverend Ed said that even though this was written for the followers of the teachings of Jesus at that time, in a way it seems to be divinely inspired, because seen metaphysically, it relates to us today as well, and to our own hero's journey, which again, I love that. And that the entire book is a series of steps in that journey. There was another symbol, the tree of life, that is used quite a bit, and that relates to the sense of duality of good and evil. When you think back, to the story of Adam and Eve and eating the apple and all that good stuff. But he said from a higher perspective, that represents endurance and integrity, grounded in the earth and guided by spirit, which kind of comes into play here a little bit later in his teachings too. And there's an image of Christ in the Revelation. It's kind of a fearful image, is the way it's depicted. But what he says is his feet are firmly planted on the earth, but his eyes reflect the light of spirit, which I thought was extremely interesting. Also, the Son of Man is used within Revelation, and Jesus even spoke of the Son of Man, and he said the true meaning of that is human, to be human. The churches represent the dimensional spiritual awareness within us. And that's used quite a bit in Revelation. And repentance, he said, means simply to think again, to hold fast to the spiritual truth within us. And the Lamb, as depicted in throughout that book, is the Christ self. There's even talk of being washed in the blood of the Lamb. That is the life energy of the Christ consciousness. And there's mention of the seven-headed dragon, which a lot of religious orders have attributed to Satan, or some spiritual practices to the ego. He says that the seven-headed dragon is really the ringmaster of the whole drama. It is that fearful insistence on belief in duality. And the seven-headed dragon causes quite a bit of chaos, which we'll get to that. He said that seen through a higher perspective, the book of Revelation and the story that it tells is really a personal, practical guide for our spiritual growth. It's meaningful symbolism that applies to us today as well as it did to the readers at that time. It's clear and shows a loving support for our journey. Okay, I love that. The John, whoever John was, he didn't title that his writing because it was written as a letter. It was later religious leaders that titled it the Apocalypse, which in Greek simply means revelation. Which I thought that was kind of interesting. Of course, that's how it made it into the Bible, it's the book of Revelation. There are 22 chapters in the book of Revelation, and Reverend Ed breaks that down into 22 steps throughout his book, where he takes apart the symbolism in each of those chapters and gives metaphysical explanations and interpretations of that, and shows how that journey progresses. He said that the book of Revelation is not written sequentially. You have, and this relates a lot to our own lives too. You'll have these moments of clarity and understanding, and then chaos, and then times of peace and comfort and encouragement, and then again this chaos, and then times of over and over and over again. And doesn't that sound like our spiritual journey? I know, speaking for myself, probably for most of us as well, there are times when I feel like I've got it together and I really am growing and understanding, and life is working for me, and then life as it does, it happens, and suddenly plunged into this pit of despair, which is also one of the symbols within the book. And it feels like you've lost everything, but the beauty of it is, and he says, it's all within God's plan, or it's all within the plan of God. That is just lifting us to a new height. And even though life happens and challenges happen, which is our reason for being, on this earth as it is, each time we reach those challenges, it's with a new perspective and it's with a deeper understanding. We're not the same person when things happen over and over again. That is the way the book of Revelation is written as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. I'm not going to break down every step in here, but kind of follow, the sequence the way that it's written. He says, when we first start that spiritual path from, this physical experience, it's like opening the energies that we think of as those chakras, the lower chakras to begin with. He said at first, we're very immersed in our humanity, in family and work and, just living lives on this earth. And I think we can all relate to that. Even as children, that your whole world is kind of your family. And then as you grow, you start growing into these other aspects of humanity. But then after that, he said that that's a very important part of that spiritual growth. Again, that's that being grounded in the earth, or grounded on the earth, I should say, with spiritual guidance. The fact that we are here in this human experience shows that being a part of that human experience is extremely important to our growth. It's not that, we can just do away with that to become spiritual beings. That's not what we're here for. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He said that tree of life actually represents that, being grounded in the earth, but reaching higher. I also thought about Michael Beckwith's visioning process as I was reading this as well, where we kind of start out on this spiritual journey, with this feeling of being victims. And then as we start to gain a little bit of mastery of, the spiritual self, we begin to manifest and we begin, to get a little control. And then we reach a point where, we're beginning to sense maybe that Christ within. And the ultimate end of that journey would be to actually recognize our oneness as the whole. And that's kind of the process, he said, that we go through with, starting out as very much a part of humanity. I have to read this. Developing, then we begin to develop that sense of self and listening to ourselves, kind of solar plexus, gut feeling, listening to your own gut, listening to your own self, developing a sense of love that's, bigger than ourselves, and a spiritual purpose, beginning to transfer from that total physicality and into more, of a spiritual person, not to transform the physical, not to overcome it, but to transform it. And I thought that was interesting. And at some point, we recognize that our connection to the divine is a direct one. There's no one else that can do that for us. It's within us. Jesus taught that as well. But that's part of that process that we go through. And then he said, begin to develop those aspects and energies that we associate with those higher chakras. Speaking the word by claiming our and expressing our personal spiritual power. At some point in our journey, that becomes the next step. Charles Fillmore talks about that and says to clothe our thoughts in white robes. Again, that's symbolism as well from this book of Revelation. He said we enter the book of life by living our spiritual identity and purpose. That again, that's another symbol that's talked about, within the book. And we begin to perceive possibilities, releasing those personal inadequacies. I'm talking. And transforming from personal prosperity into the ideal of shared human consciousness, shared spiritual awareness, into that true oneness at some point. Again, remembering that it's not a linear process. There's going to be life that happens. There's going to be, challenges that come up. But as we come back to it, it's with a deeper understanding each time as we are following the process of these steps. Jesus taught that heaven is the realm of pure potential where human experience perfectly reflects the divine potential that's already present. And I think about that in, the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And, that makes sense to me, that's exactly what is going on, is that we're just attuning ourselves to that divine potential that's already there. So our human focus is on developing that Christ consciousness within ourselves, but there's a higher awareness. The spiritual focus is more on realizing what we live and breathe and have, our being within. Kind of like, we are the drops, but not the entire ocean. Or, I'm not all that God is, but all that I am is God. It's something much higher that, we're attaining an awareness of through this process. He says these steps are going to reappear. They're going to appear, they're going to reappear with life's challenges. And I think we've all, experienced some of that. Again, there are times when I just feel like I got it, I've got it together. And man, bam, life hits you with something. But it's a continuing process. It's a cycle, of growth and of reaching a deeper level every single time. He said putting God first helps us to make those creative choices. When we see all those possibilities and potentials, we're able to make better choices. Jesus showed us that death is only an illusion. Was that his purpose? I don't know, but that definitely is a lesson for us. And so many of the things that we are so fearful of are going to revolve around, that fear. And he taught, or he demonstrated that it is only an illusion. He talked about the angels, when we're really having those low, difficult times. He said the angels are there to encourage, to support, to guide. And I love that he said that the angels are really, they're siblings. They're siblings in spirit. They have not chosen, at least at this point, to incarnate in the physical. And so the human part of the experience is not something that they go through, but they are siblings in spirit, and they're there, for our guidance. And Revelation is full of the angels, and opening the scrolls, and giving guidance. And in some cases, what appears to be, pronouncing judgment, but not when it's seen in a spiritual light. There is symbolism there of the Lamb opening the scrolls. So the Lamb again represents that Christ consciousness, and the blood of the Lamb, the life force in that Christ consciousness. That's a very big symbol within the Revelation. At one point, a rider on a white horse appears. There's riders on various horses, and he talks about the symbolism. But I really picked up on the white one, because the white horse appears, and then at the end of Revelation, the white horse appears again. And he said that shows that the guidance through this process, that it's like it's leading us through the way, with what this horse is symbolizing, and the horse and rider is symbolizing, which I liked. The second coming, he said, of course, that doesn't have anything to do with Jesus coming. He said, Jesus did his part. He's done. That has to do with our awakening to the Christ consciousness, which is beautiful. There is, again, as you're going through this process, the trumpeting chaos, that is imagined within this story, pretty vividly, very much relating to, what happens to us as we go through our process. But again, that, God is in all of that, and everything good, well, I don't say everything, I shouldn't say it that way, but good things do come out of what seems to be chaos. And so, using those the power that we have to realize that it's an illusion, that we are, on a path, and that we do have what it takes to go through that. That's part of the message, the story, the storyline, the hero's journey that we're on. He said, when Revelation talks about plagues, there's fire, there's locusts, there's the dark pit, there's the marauding, I don't know, he calls them cavalrymen, they have a name, I've forgotten what it is. But he said that is that cleansing, clearing out of some of those things that are holding us back, those fears, those things that we sometimes don't even want to look at or acknowledge within ourselves. It's all a cleaning, it's a clearing, represented in the book as plagues. But again, knowing, that God is in all of that. And then, of course, after the chaos comes a review where we begin to reassess, what our purpose is, and kind of realign ourselves, and I know in my case anyway, process, what's happened, process where I am, and what the possibilities are, what my choices are moving forward. Again, just written in cycles, not linear. Life's not linear. Then he talks about how in Revelation, there's this idea of atonement, as if we, needed to atone for something. And there's talk of, measuring the temple. Well, Jesus taught that we are the temple. So I liken that to that processing that I do within myself, and I'm sure you can all relate to. When something new happens, or, some new awareness happens, or I discover something about myself that I didn't realize before, there's a processing that goes through. Measuring that temple, taking stock of who I am and where I've come from, and what my purpose is, and those things do deepen as my understanding deepens. And so that made sense to me, that measuring that temple has to do with my own, inner work, my own inner processing. I think we could probably all relate to that. There's an image in the book of Revelation, of the woman giving birth. And this chapter, he says, meeting the actors. There's a woman giving birth and going through the travails, those of you that have given birth, what that's like. But he talks about that birth being the birth of the Christ consciousness, and that woman, of course, being an aspect of ourselves, that feminine aspect of God, and giving birth to that consciousness. And lo and behold, there's the seven-headed dragon, waiting to devour the child when it is born. And if you think of that as that ego, wanting to hold on to that idea of separation and duality, fearful of this awakening consciousness of, the Christ within. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes it more of a beautiful image than a terrible one, which, just to read it as it is, it sounds pretty terrible, but a beautiful, unfolding of the process. And, we have the power to not let that have power, to not let that fear of, what I'm trying to say, the illusion of duality, we have power over that. That has no power in itself, at all. And, we have the ability to birth that Christ consciousness within ourselves. As a result of that, we have all of those tools. They're all part of who we are. the story talks about the two beasts. And according to Reverend Ed, it has to do with false belief in duality. Okay? Again, that has really no power. Once we recognize that it has no power, any power it has, we have given it. And then also, he said, putting faith in in government, no matter what government you live in. At that time that the letters were written, of course, it was the Roman Empire. But no matter what government you live in, not putting faith there. And he goes on to say that what he means by that is the human condition. Not putting our faith in, humanity. Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Of course, we follow the laws and we're good citizens and all that sort of thing. But recognizing that that is not our power. That is not the power in our life. The power comes from our spiritual awakening. It comes from that Christ consciousness within, the spiritual truth within. So we can live within this very human world and still be, not of it. As, I believe Jesus said, be, in the world but not of it. He said a way of doing that is affirming the good. Just living with that affirmation of the good that anchors us in remembering the truth of who we are and of living that truth. Taking moral inventory of ourselves. That makes me think of living, in integrity. Living in integrity with what we recognize to be truth within ourselves. Again, we have that direct connection. Nobody's going to tell you what moral authority is for you. That's going to be based upon what you know, what you understand from, your own connection to that higher power. He said that Jesus said that spiritual surrender brings astonishment. And Reverend Ed uses the word amazement. He says that because that's where we recognize that all those terrible beasts that, that we fear, all those thoughts within ourselves, all those fears of death, all those fears of, whatever we live with, they're nothing but an illusion. And that's where the amazement comes from, which I thought was pretty encouraging, really. And then he says that there's a process in this where there's a grieving that takes place, and that is normal. And that made me stop and think, why would I grieve, if I'm growing in consciousness and awareness of my true self, what would I be grieving? But then when I kind of personalized that, and I thought, well, that, it kind of makes sense in a way, because I know, to think back, and I'll just use this as an example. I think back about my childhood, and of course, hindsight is always different than, having been there at the time, but I think about the good times, and I think about, family, and I remember all those good times, and there's a little sorrow, there's a little sadness, the good old days, we think of them, they probably weren't at the time, but, we do tend to think that, and I realize, and I'm sure many of you do too, that the more I grow, the harder it is for me to go back. And if I do make a mistake, a sin, an error, in thinking, and it's harder every time. And it would be easy to think, wow, it was a lot easier when I didn't know that I'm responsible for everything, and I could be a victim, and all that. And so I guess there is that little bit of that process of grief, of what we've given up, but what we're gaining, is so much more worth it. And so on a positive note, he says, holding those affirmations of gratitude for the new, seeing the new is a way of getting through those times when we might be grieving, that more innocent way of looking at things. You know, it's a lot easier to blame somebody else than it is to take responsibility for myself. But, you know, affirming that newness in, you know, my awareness of who I am and, you know, my own power is a way of getting through those things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then got to, you know, there's a chapter on consequences. And this is where many people still see God as judging, and that the book of Revelation is full of, you know, judgments on, you know, humanity by God. Of course, we do know there are consequences for our actions, and, you know, that's part of that growth process, is recognizing those. But judgment has no power, and I love it that he said God sees no duality. There is no duality in God. And so for God to be able to judge right and wrong, you know, I mean, that's kind of a dichotomy. There is no duality in God. All of that is a construct of our own thinking. And so, you know, why would it make sense that, you know, God would be judging us at all? God is what God is, and that's, you know, absolute perfection and oneness and no duality. And so judgment doesn't even make sense, but of course that's how the book of Revelation is seen. So there's nothing to fear. There is nothing to fear. And trusting in God's presence, you know, is what can help us get through those feelings of, you know, being judged or doing wrong. There's nothing to fear. Trusting in God's presence, that, you know, God is in everything. And, you know, we say that. This, I thought, was just beautiful. And of course, that's the name of the book, is Kingdom Come. And what he said is, we don't go to God. We don't go to God. God comes to us. God is everywhere. God is with us always. And we, you know, even though we're not aware of it, of course, God is here. But when we welcome that presence, that's when we actually recognize heaven. And I love this. Heaven expresses in our lives when we make that choice. God is here. We don't go to God. We're not going to heaven. God comes to us. You know, God is here all the time. We open the door to our unconsciousness of seeing, you know, God in our lives. And I just love that. I'm going to end this. I looked up the meaning of the word revelation, and this is out of the Cambridge Dictionary. And it says, revelation is the act of making something known that was secret, or a fact that is made known. And, you know, when you think of it in that term, then I guess revelation is it's a pretty exciting, you know, pretty exciting concept. And the beauty of this process, as it's interpreted by, you know, Reverend Ed, and it's been interpreted by Charles Fillmore, you know, it makes this journey beautiful, this hero's journey beautiful. And I, for one, found just it very, very encouraging, you know, to see Revelation in this new light. So hopefully you did as well. So I love you. Namaste. Hey, everyone.
Thank you so much, Paula. I absolutely love your talks, and I think we got the author on that one wrong when we had it up on the intro screen, and that is Dr. Ed Townley. And wonderful, wonderful work, and I really appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to take you to our next page. If you would like to make a donation towards our ministry, you can go to our website at unityofspringfield.org. You can give through our Tithely app, which you can download. You can go to PayPal at ccunity@sbcglobal.net. And you can also do it the old-fashioned way. You can mail a check to Unity of Springfield in Springfield, Missouri, 2214 East Seminole Street. And again, we always thank you for your absolutely gracious gifts. Today's 11 o'clock celebration service is going to be Receive Your Good, Practically Applying Spiritual Principles, and that's with Sue Baggett Day. Next Sunday, our adult education is James Masters, and always love the talks from James. 10 Ways to Love Yourself, based on Louise Hay's work. So come and join us in person by registering online at unityofspringfield.org. Often, I think you can just show up at the door too, and there's usually room to seat those who have not registered, but it's always good to register online ahead of time. I wish you all a great day. Give yourselves a big, big hug. I believe next Sunday, I'm going to be back in church regularly too, and one of these days I think I'm going to start recording from church, in the fellowship hall. So I'm looking forward to that. I did get my second COVID vaccine and waiting 2 weeks after that. So next Sunday, pretty close, I'm going to be probably there in church. So I hope to see you there then too. If not, we'll see you online. Have a great, great day, a great week ahead. God loves you and we love you too. Namaste.